Hello and welcome to Individual Differences, Psychopathology, Cognitive Treatment for Depression. So far we've already looked at two cognitive models for explaining depression, and what we'll look at today is the therapy that those models spawned. So you'll be able to describe cognitive treatments, predominantly CBT, and evaluate the efficacy of psychological treatments for depression. Now, just to recap some key cognitive features. Remember, the cognitive approach adopts a nomothetic approach, which means we make general rules and laws based on specific studies and cases. We use different experimental methods, including experimental psychology, computer analogies, and neuroscience. Case studies are important, schemas, suffers from machine reductionism. Behavior is explained by how the mind operates, which is going to be the crucial element here, and mental processes such as attention, input and output of stimulus, coding capacity are really important as well. It focuses on the mediation processes, so all these cognitive interventions rely on this assumption that behavior is explained by how the mind works, and that by intervening at that mediating level we can change the outcome. So let's look at cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. This therapy aims to identify and alter negative beliefs, challenge them. That's the cognitive element, but there's also a behavioral element which aims to look at behaviours that are dysfunctional and change those. Sometimes changing your behaviours can be the easier part than changing the thinking. And what's important to understand, as you can see from this diagram, is this is a feedback loop, that each of these elements feed into each other. So negative thoughts make certain behaviours more likely, and those behaviours may be reinforcing of those negative thoughts and emotions. So, different CBT techniques. Well, there is a range of CBT out there, and they vary in program length, session length, all sorts of other variables, but there are some key features that are common to many of them. The first is what's called behavioural activation. Now, behavioural activation has actually been shown to be as effective as a full CBT program. What behavioural activation refers to is the idea that you identify potential activities that you no longer carry out. So it might be you no longer socialise because of negative thoughts about your friends. Maybe you think they don't really like you, or you're embarrassed about whatever it may be. So you stop actually engaging with a particular group. Well, we try to identify those activities that you no longer do, and what are the cognitive barriers to achieving them, and we try to deconstruct them. So a good example might be avoiding school to avoid a bully. Someone is saying nasty things to you at school, so your solution is to avoid school entirely because you can't cope. And the key then is to equip yourself with skills that will help you cope. Graded homework assignments are often set, and these ask you to try out different cognitive strategies and ways of thinking in a home environment, and leading up to sort of more rewarding activities. So it might just be changing the way you think about a specific relatively mild or small element, and then building up. Thought catching is very common, and it's not uncommon to ask participants or clients to keep a diary, and they'll write down in their diary negative thoughts as they arise. The crucial thing about thought catching is to actually challenge those thoughts. Are they rational? Are they irrational? And problem solving. This is a systematic technique. The most common is probably the 5 steps. And what this is designed to do is help clients identify the problems, possible causes, and then do a little bit of science, a little bit of hypothesis testing. What is causing the problem? Let's test to see if that's the case, and if we validate it, then we can deal with that cause specifically. Often things that we think cause our depression have nothing to do with it. cognitive restructuring. These are types of biases and cognitive fallacies that we perform, and they're fairly common amongst people without depression, such as all or nothing thinking. I will only be worthwhile if I win, otherwise I'll be worthless. Or and we'll look at a few more of these now. So this is an area I'm personally really interested in. I love cognitive biases. I love finding out why people lie to themselves and the stories they invent to justify behaviours that they've already pretty much engaged in or decisions they've already made. Well, there's a couple here, apart from things like confirmation bias, which I've talked probably a lot about. There are 3 types that are worth considering, and you would have to tackle these through CBT. One is magical thinking. Now, we can all suffer from this at different times, but it's the belief that an object, action, or circumstance not logically related to a course of events can influence its outcome. So something benign would be something like lucky socks. You know, sports players, they often have a lucky pair of underwear, socks, lucky charm, and they feel if they don't carry it with them, then they won't perform. However, a more extreme event might be something that we tend to see in OCD actually, but is common to depression as well. Something like stepping on cracks in the pavement leading to death of a family member. This is clearly magical thinking, the idea that one event or activity can have a mysterious effect, a magical effect on something else. Overgeneralization. This cognitive distortion is quite common. We see a single piece of evidence and we use it to justify, a negative belief in ourselves. So it might be, you fail on a single test and you use that one example just to demonstrate how, unacademic you really are. Where you're in a relationship and your partner cheats on you, and you use that single incident to generalise, overgeneralise, that no one can be trusted. Men, women, they're all out for themselves. Overgeneralisation, again, we're all guilty of this to an extent. And emotional reasoning. So this is when we believe our feelings equal reality. So if we feel like we're not very bright, then that means that we're not very bright. And no amount of real world evidence will change your mind. So you can score 100% on the test, but you still feel like you're not very good. Is a cognitive distortion. You may have some, one or all of these types of cognitive distortion. There are many more, so don't be afraid to Google to expand your repertoire. Ellis's ABC model then. That was CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, broadly based on Beck and Beck's triad. This is rational emotive behavioural therapy, and it's based more on Ellis's ABC model. So irrational behavioural emotive therapy, the purpose is to change irrational beliefs into rational ones. So remember, Ellis believed that the main issue was that we were having irrational beliefs leading to maladaptive behaviour. So what we do is we must tackle masturbatory thinking in this situation. And remember, these were sorts of things like I must do well, I must have the approval of others, I expect to be treated kindly, life must be easy and stuff like that. The key is for the client to accept themselves and faults and all. So get away from this black and white, I must be a paragon, a perfect being, and say, well, I'm not perfect and I can live with that. So let's have a look at some faulty thinking. A, the activating event. You underperform on a test, perhaps you get a D. B, the belief, maladaptive belief in this case. I got a D because the test was unfair. It was impossible to do well in. So you believe the test was impossible. Well, under those circumstances, your behaviour, how would you respond? Imagine if the test genuinely wasn't fair. What if I'd sat up all night to design a test deliberately to rob you of the top grades? Or almost any negative behaviour, such as not bothering you in future, or quitting school, or whatever it may be, could be justified under those sort of circumstances. The consequence might be a developed belief that you're worthless, and the behaviour may be that you don't engage in class next time, or you lose trust in your teachers, or you drop out of school, or whatever. Now let's see how we might tackle this. So you underperform on a test, you get a D, you think the test was unfair. This is where we challenge it, and we analyse, well, actually, how much work did I do? What were the questions I got wrong? And was it reasonable? This is a common issue actually in people with conspiracy theories. People who engage deeply in conspiracy theories have a lot of this faulty thinking where they do not consider what the alternative explanations might be, and they suffer from confirmation bias as well. So we might challenge it and say, I probably didn't work hard. How much work did other people do? Did I do as much? Even if I did work as hard as everyone else, maybe actually I just didn't understand that topic as well as I thought I did. And then this can lead to a better consequence, which might be a recognition that it's just one test, but also that you might have to work harder on the next one, or you might have to redo the test or something. Right, how reliable are psychological interventions such as CBT and REBT? Well, Robinson et al. 1990 carried out a review, 57 studies. A review is kind of like a meta-analysis. Essentially it found that cognitive therapies were effective compared to drug therapies. However, they were no better. CBT, for example, was no better than other psychological therapies. So we can't single CBT out as being supremely the best therapy available. Keller et al. 2000 found that combining CBT with drugs had some of the highest recovery rates. So actually a combined approach might be more appropriate. However, there will be a cost implication to that. Kuiken found that those patients seeing one of 18 cognitive behavioural therapists had varying outcomes. In other words, those that saw the most competent therapist had the best outcomes. Now this is really important because this suggests that the client-therapist relationship is a crucial factor leading to differences in the effectiveness of treatment. So if I'm your therapist and I'm really good at my job, you may have better outcomes than if I'm incompetent. Now that's a problem because drugs tend to have fairly uniform effects, so there are individual differences. Therapists, there is an ethical issue there in deciding which treatment to actually assign, and how you go about actually assessing the competence of different therapists. Simon found CBT less effective with people that have rigid attitudes. So a key to most psychological therapies is a desire for change and a willingness to engage and take part in the activities prescribed by the therapist. So if you think about the homework task, you've got to go away and practice those and then come back with your findings, and that may not be that easy. CBT is widely used, so strength is widely used. There are two programs on the NHS. The National Institute for Clinical Excellence recommends and recognises CBT. However, there is a huge cost associated with CBT. Therapists are paid well, but a face-to-face 1 hour session is very costly compared to a packet of SSRIs, for example. SSRIs have proven to be effective when it comes to depression, and they tend to be a lot cheaper. So if you're in a medical context, the decision you have to make is going to be a cost benefit analysis. Now, one of the most interesting developments out of CBT has been online platforms such as Mood Gym. So Mood Gym is an online website which has downloadable worksheets and homework assignments and all sorts of stuff like that. It's designed to essentially be an application online in which someone suffering from a variety of psychological disorders can actually self-medicate, in this case use Mood Gym software to actually improve their outcomes. Well, Christensen analysed the effectiveness of Mood Gym and found that it was as effective as CBT. Now the reason why this is important is because, as we said, face-to-face CBT is very cost intensive. You've got these highly trained therapists who are paid huge amounts of money per the hour. Moodgym, apart from the initial development cost, which is going to be quite high, depending on how many people sign up, the cost for treatment for each individual could be pennies if enough people use it. So actually Moodgym represents potentially a cost-effective solution. You can find the website at the following link, and I would definitely recommend using it. Cognitive behavioural therapy is useful for treating depression, but it is also useful generally for things like motivation. It helps you identify the barriers to success and goals and overcome those. And we all suffer from, some psychological foibles, whether it's confirmation bias or masturbatory thinking. And actually Moodgym and CBT, whilst formally wouldn't be prescribed for someone without a psychological disorder, I think it can be an effective technique for just general life improvement. But that's just my opinion. CBT in the cultural context, and I'll finish up with the extent to which CBT, could be argued is ethnocentric. And what we mean by that is the whole idea of cognitive behavioural therapy is that you sit down with a therapist and you discuss your problems and you identify solutions. Well, that's a very Western individualistic approach to dealing with mental health. Specifically, this is a tradition that's developed in the West where talking about our feelings is very common, but you find in collectivist cultures the idea of openly discussing your problems, emotional problems, psychological problems, is seen as burdening the group. And actually there is more emphasis in cultures such as the Chinese culture and perhaps the Japanese culture to internalize your issues, your mental problems, rather than share them. So the extent to which CBT can be applied outside the cultural context of the West may be questionable. As always, if you have any questions, you know where I am. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you around.